I've just watched a video from Better Together, and in that video they are showing a number of clips from some of the extremists on the Yes Scotland side. Um, I've obviously put forward some of my views on this already, and I'm not seeking to convert anyone. Obviously, hardcore nationalists are not going to give a damn what I say, but I guess I would appeal to moderate people who are going to vote yes to, if not change their mind about the issues, then at least rein in on the extremists within their midst. And actually, it's that point I want to commence with. In no way do I believe that every person in Scotland who's going to vote yes is a bitter, small-minded nationalist. I don't believe that. I've seen a number of yes people who are reasonable people, and I could agree with probably on a number of issues, not connected to the Union, but connected with socio-political issues generally. But basically, the video shows particularly the campaign against Labour MP Jim Murphy. Now, what that man's been subjected to is disgusting. If you imagine, if you're in England and you saw the video of what happened to Nigel Farage, imagine that times 10. That's what Jim Murphy has had to go through. Now, he has went around Scotland. He was going to do 100 tours, 100 stops I should say, but I believe that may have been suspended due to possible safety concerns. The egging incident was really not the worst of it. Actually, some of the language is worse than that. You know, politicians have been egged before. It sort of comes with the territory. It's not pleasant, but it's hardly the worst of things. But some of the really poisonous, toxic sort of jargon that these extreme nationalists are using is branding Mr. Murphy a Quisling. Now, if you know history, Vikram Quisling was a Norwegian politician who I believe sided with the Third Reich. Now, that was a time of war when thousands of Norwegians were actually sacrificing. So the implications of that are war, connected with war. So what they're essentially saying is that Jim Murphy is a collaborator. Now, he turned round and pointed that out. What they're insinuating, and they didn't even deny it, they said, yes, you're a collaborator. In other words, they regard the English as the enemies. In other words, they still have a Bannockburn mindset, and that is what I find so troubling about these nationalists. Now, just to be clear, I've got no problem with romantic notions of Scottish history. Although a lot of it's based on distortion. I mean, these people really do seem to take their history lessons from Mel Gibson films. But being from Northern Ireland, I am concerned about what implications this might hold in the future of Scotland. It is absolutely inevitable that this was going to be a heated debate from the start. I mean, when you're talking about the future of actually not only one country but two countries. Scotland is a country, and that is a huge issue. But one thing I think that has been hugely overlooked in this debate, by both sides actually, and it's something I think the Better Together campaign hasn't done enough, is point out that actually the United Kingdom is also a country. You know, it is a union, but it is also a country. So we're talking about the future of Scotland, but as a non-Scot, something I take issue with is the fact that the future of the United Kingdom is at stake here. And that's something I think that's been hugely overlooked. But unfortunately, the debate in Scotland has been so obsessive about Scotland that that's been overlooked. Of course, Scotland is first and foremost going to be impacted, but England, Wales and Northern Ireland will be impacted. It's inevitable, as part of the larger country, which is the United Kingdom. I mentioned the egging incident. There's these sort of chants of Quisling. There's been even people on the yes side challenging Jim Murphy to a fight. They've even stooped as low as attacking people who, from the Better Together side, who have been asking him questions. In other words, they're trying to shout down their opposition. And I'm sure there may well be some hardliners, by which I mean people who have used unsavoury methods within the Better Together side as well, Now, I've already condemned, for example, comparing Alex Salmond to Kim Jong-il. I think that was stupid. But I can honestly say, my reflection is the extremism has been much, much more from Yes Scotland. These people are pushing, I'm talking about the extremists, I'm not talking about everyone, have been pushing a very toxic form of nationalism, a very them and us mentality. So these extremists, they portray the other side as English Tory bastards. And it's not dissimilar, in fact, to how minority groups were scapegoated under the Third Reich. And I'm not saying that it's going to end up with the same situation, far from it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying this is the politics of division and hatred, and it's toxic, actually. It's a very, very, very ugly thing. I can understand them having strong views, for example, on poverty in Scotland. I think there's a legitimate debate to be had about that. And there is a socialist argument to be made, although, as George Galloway pointed out, it's stupid dividing the country to take that on. Independence isn't the answer. The answer is socialists working together. But the sort of toxic and divisive language that they have been using is quite troubling, frankly. And I am worried about the sectarianism that's going to follow. As Jim Murphy pointed out, what are these people going to do with this anger if they don't get their way? If this is how they are behaving now, when we don't even know what the result is going to be, let's say for the sake of argument, I think whatever happens it's going to be close, but let's say Scotland does stay in the Union. Let's say better together prevails, which I hope beyond hope that they do. I am concerned about what Yes Scotland is going to do. Some of the extremists within their midst. There has already been individuals within Yes Scotland who have resorted to terrorist tactics. Now, thankfully, no one has died. But I am concerned, being from Northern Ireland, they might well go down the line of the real IRA. And if that sounds like an extreme statement, don't forget the Irish paramilitaries began with anger on the streets and this sort of unrest. It didn't, they didn't just become terrorists overnight. So they're branding Jim Murphy a terrorist, but they are using the language of terrorists. Jim Murphy has shown them a lot more respect than they've shown him. But he's only human, and I have seen him lose his temper, and I don't blame him. In fact, I am pleased he is standing up, not only for himself. This isn't just about Jim Murphy. It is about representing, as a democratically elected politician, it is about him representing the views of Unionists in Scotland, who have shamefully been shouted down, branded traitors, branded quislings, branded Tory English bastards. This is the sort of poisonous rhetoric that they are using. Them and us. That is their mentality. Now, of course, they deny that they're racist. They say there are English who support them. And I have seen a few English support Scottish independence moves. But those English, from what I have seen, again, not everyone, but they tend to be English nationalists, so they have pretty much the same mindset. If they had their way, England would be completely separate from the UK as well. So they share. It's a little bit, to me, that is a little bit like communists working with fascists just to take on the establishment. Nationalism, as far as I'm concerned, unless it is a legitimate case of freedom, it's a toxic ideology. And I do mention freedom because it really makes my blood boil when I see Scottish nationalists whinge about... I saw one comment earlier, one guy saying, I cannot wait till the 19th of September until when I'll be a free man. What exactly does he think, that in an independent Scotland they'll still have to have elections and they won't always like what they get? The SNP, unless it's going to be a single party state, the SNP isn't always going to be in charge. So in that sense, what exactly do they want? I mean, when they talk about freedom, I think about Yazidi people living in northern Iraq, on Sinjar Mountain, frightened for their lives. So when Scottish nationalists wallow in their victimhood mentality and use this sort of language of freedom, it really makes me angry because it's such a false analogy. There's absolutely no logic of... Firstly, human freedom doesn't absolutely exist anywhere. No independent country in the world can you find people with absolute freedom. There's plenty of, they often use the Scandinavian model, and whilst those are successful societies, you'll find disgruntled people in those societies. In fact, I believe Finland has a very high rate of alcoholism and depression, and that's nothing against Finland. I'm just making the point that they have this notion that independence is going to be this utopian picnic. My argument would be about that every independent country in the world has social problems as well. So if they think that the problems that Scotland has now are just going to vanish with independence, I think it's incredibly misguided. And at that point I would say, yeah, the Union does need to improve. And I wouldn't have a major problem with further devolution powers, although not to the extent of bringing this up again. Because I am concerned that too much devolution would then mean that the independence question would just crop up again. Anyway, I would also say to, yes, Scotland, if you really want to practice what you preach, then are you going to grant a referendum to people in Orkney and Shetland who might want to break away from the rule of Edinburgh? Well, are you? You see, this is where their hypocrisy comes through, because when they brand democratically elected Scottish politicians terrorists and quislings, when they use this sort of divisive politics, and when they talk about freedom, if you look deeper into it, it's just such phony bullshit. So much of it. I'm not saying the United Kingdom is perfect. I think it would be very naive and wrong to say that. And there are very legitimate questions to be had. Scotland does have social problems that are well above the national average in some parts of the UK. I mean, Glasgow, for example, has some very serious social problems. Although having said that, urban centres in the UK tend to have higher social problems than rural areas, generally speaking. You can find similar situations in parts of Liverpool and London. But independence, I don't believe, is the answer to solve that. So that's all I want to say here. But if you are an undecided voter, or if you are someone who is going to vote yes, I'm not trying to... It's up to you how you vote. And I'm not modelling this video in order to tell you how to vote. I will be making my case in other videos, but if you're undecided, or if you're a moderate yes person, please rein in these extremists, because actually they're going to impact you just as much as anyone. In an independent Scotland, if they're allowed to take hold, if they're going to be shouting down anybody who disagrees with them. I mean, to be fair, there was a yes supporter who went over and apologised to Jim Murphy. He said, these people don't represent me. But it's a little bit like Islamists don't represent all Muslims, but they make a lot of noise. So certainly not all yes people are extremists, but there seems to be a very hard core. And another point about them, they're well organised. I'll put a link to this video that Better Together has shown, and it shows that they are actually organising online where Jim Murphy's going to be. So this is an orchestrated campaign of harassment and intimidation. Let's not be misled into thinking that this is just a heated debate. He's a politician, so we can treat him like shit. Of course they have a right to ask Jim Murphy questions, tough questions, and it's his job as a politician to answer those questions. But he's also a human being, and that doesn't mean that they have a right to try and intimidate him and violently harass him. And yes, there has been threats of violence. That's disgusting. It's a disgusting way to treat anyone. I was sickened when I saw them treat Nigel Farage like that. I mean, it's the way the far left never get this. They brand someone like Farage a racist and divisive and all the rest of it, and he may well be that. But behaving like thugs is not the way to convince most people that you are right, because then you just come across as what that comes across as, which is thuggery. In other words, whatever arguments the Yes campaign might have, and I mean by now it's pretty obvious I'm a staunch unionist, but the point here is they are not going to be very appealing to undecided voters in Scotland with this sort of bully boy tactics. I mean, like I say, it isn't just Jim Murphy. They have tried to intimidate even people who are supporting Jim Murphy. They called one woman a plant, as if they're the only people in Scotland who are allowed an opinion. And it's really ugly. And like I say, I am unsettled by it, because I don't know what the future of Scotland is going to be like. If they get either way, if they get independence, is it going to be this sort of divisive society whereby people who would have nostalgia for the United Kingdom are going to be shouted down and marginalised? And if they don't get their way, how are they going to respond? I mean, if anything, I think one of the mistakes the Better Together campaign has perhaps made, I mean, I do believe they've tried their best to be positive amid some very negative vitriol, but maybe they haven't at times been as assertive as the Yes campaign has been in terms of campaigning for, and this is not a criticism of Jim Murphy, the man has worked tirelessly, I'm not attacking him, but I just mean generally maybe the campaign could have been more assertive. But you know, I'm not going to be a doom monger, it's still very close, and I'm still cautiously optimistic actually that the UK will stay. I am optimistic, and my gut feeling is that the Union will stay, but there's absolutely no way I or anyone else on the Better Together side can be complacent. So this sort of behaviour, you know, when they're interviewed, they say, "Oh, we're not thugs, we're not." But they need to look at themselves. They need to look at audios of this behaviour. And the thing is, they've seen it. They gloat about it. They don't even have any shame. You know, most people at some point lose temper, especially on something as important as this. But these people aren't even looking at that and feeling any shame. They're not saying, "Oh, well, yeah, I lost my temper a bit." They're proud of it. And it's just deeply troubling. And like I say, I think Jim Murphy's showing a hell of a lot more respect to them than they have to him. Anyway, I'll leave it there, but just very ugly. And I'm sickened by it, actually. So I would like to see these extreme nationalists reined in, and it is an utter disgrace that Alex Salmond has not condemned them. An utter disgrace. And meanwhile, the Better Together campaign should also behave responsibly. If there are extremists within Better Together who, for example, harass people who are going to vote yes, they should be condemned. And as a unionist, I condemn them. There can be no place for sectarianism in a future Scotland, but unfortunately the behaviour of extreme nationalists is going to make that inevitable. But sooner or later, unionists are going to stand up for themselves and fight back.